And look who's coming up.
And now the man of the hour is back out on the field. Kirk Gibson, have you ever had a feeling like this?
Well, it's hard to match, I'll say that.
I was the egotistical jerk in 1983. I don't have a problem saying that. Did I do anything intentionally? Certainly not. Did I want to treat people poorly? Certainly not. But the point of my book is, I think I've come full circle, and I really have a need to try and become a better person.
Losing your temper doesn't always mean you have a bad attitude. Sometimes the weight of expectations just builds up until it pushes you to the edge. Take Kirk Gibson, for example. People had such high hopes for him that the pressure almost backed him into a corner, forcing him to play with that fiery, aggressive energy. Kirk Gibson was never the kind of guy to hold back his emotions. He played with fire, intensity, and sometimes a temper that could get the best of him. Whether it was on the field, in the clubhouse, or even in the stands, he had more than his fair share of clashes. He argued with teammates, challenged coaches, and even had heated moments with fans. Some saw him as difficult, maybe even hot-headed, but those who truly understood him knew it wasn't about having a bad attitude. It was never about disrespect or trying to cause trouble. Instead, it all came from the incredible amount of pressure he had to carry from the very beginning of his career. Every game, every play, every decision, he was expected to perform at the highest level. The weight of those expectations followed him everywhere, pushing him to fight harder, play tougher, and demand more from himself and those around him. When Gibson was just starting out, Tigers manager Sparky Anderson made a bold statement. He called Gibson the next Mickey Mantle. Now, for any young player, that's an almost impossible expectation to live up to. Mantle wasn't just a great player, he was a true legend, one of the best to ever step onto a baseball field. His name was tied to greatness, and for anyone coming up after him, the expectations were huge. When people started comparing Gibson to Mantle, they weren't just hoping he would be good, they were expecting him to be extraordinary, to match or even surpass the legend himself. That kind of pressure can take a toll on anyone, and for Gibson, it was no different. He later admitted that the weight of those comparisons probably did more harm than good in the early part of his career. Instead of using the pressure to drive him in a positive way, it had the opposite effect. It made him more intense, more aggressive, and at times more frustrated with himself in the game. Instead of finding joy in the challenge, he often found himself battling with the expectations others had placed on him. That mental strain can be difficult to shake off, and for Gibson, it took a toll on his confidence and mindset. That frustration didn't just stay on the field. Gibson was known for being blunt, outspoken, and brutally honest about his opinions. He wasn't the type to sugarcoat things or play politics. If he had something to say, he said it. That attitude of his became very clear when he joined the Dodgers in 1988. During spring training, some of his new teammates decided to play a prank on him, thinking it would be funny or a way to break the ice. But for Gibson, it was anything but amusing. Instead of laughing it off like many would, he was furious. He didn't see it as a harmless joke. He saw it as disrespectful and unprofessional. To him, there was no room for that kind of behavior in a serious competitive environment. He was so upset that he didn't hold back. He publicly called out the team's lack of professionalism, making it clear how he felt about the situation. This wasn't exactly the smoothest way to start with his new teammates, and it definitely didn't win him any popularity contests in the beginning. But over time, that fiery, no-nonsense attitude began to have an impact. It helped set a new tone for the team, one that demanded focus, accountability, and a commitment to winning. And as history would show, it all paid off. That same season, Gibson played a huge role in leading the Dodgers to a World Series title. His unforgettable home run in Game 1, limping around the bases in pain, but still managing to deliver one of the most iconic moments in baseball history, became a symbol of his toughness and determination. His intensity, while tough at times, had helped shape the team into champions. But it wasn't just the weight of expectations that shaped Gibson's tough personality. He also faced plenty of challenges and obstacles along the way. some that were completely out of his control. In the mid-1980s, MLB team owners were secretly colluding to limit free agency, making it nearly impossible for certain players to sign with new teams or get the contracts they deserved. Gibson was one of the players who got caught in the middle of it. No matter how hard he played or how much he proved himself on the field, opportunities were being taken away from him behind the scenes. That kind of situation could make any player bitter, but for someone as intense as Gibson, it only added fuel to the fire. Even before his baseball career, Gibson had already seen how unfair the sports world could be. In college, he was a star football player at Michigan State, but his team got hit with recruiting violations that led to probation. That meant his football career was affected before it even really had a chance to take off. It was just another example of how outside forces seemed to be working against him. But he isn't just any player. He's a true warrior who fought his way to the top. Before he ever picked up a bat at the college level, he was already making a name for himself as a football star. Born and raised in Michigan, Gibson graduated from Waterford Kettering High School in 1975 and went on to play for Michigan State University. But back then, he wasn't known for crushing home runs. He was known for catching passes. Gibson was an All-American wide receiver for the Michigan State Spartans, and to say he was good at football would be an understatement. He led the Spartans to a share of the Big Ten Conference title, set school and conference receiving records, and played in major showcase games like the Hula Bowl and Senior Bowl. His natural athleticism and competitive fire made him a standout. And years later, in January 2017, he was honored for his football accomplishments by being inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. But here's where things get interesting. Gibson's football coach, Darryl Rogers, saw something in him that went beyond the gridiron. Rogers suggested that Gibson give baseball a try just to see what he could do. So for the first time since high school, Gibson stepped onto a baseball field as a serious competitor. And just like that, in only one season of college baseball, he turned heads in a big way. He hit 390, blasted 16 home runs, and racked up 52 RBIs in just 48 games. That was all the proof scouts needed. This guy had raw, untapped talent. The Detroit Tigers saw his potential and didn't waste any time, selecting him in the first round of the 1978 Major League Baseball draft. But Gibson was such a gifted athlete that the St. Louis Cardinals of the NFL also drafted him in the 7th round of the 1979 NFL draft. That meant he had a major decision to make: football or baseball. Ultimately, Gibson chose to sign with his hometown Tigers, turning his full attention to baseball and officially beginning a career that would be anything but ordinary. Gibson made his major league debut in 1979, but it took a few years before he really found his place as a full-time starter. By 1983, he had locked down the role of the Tigers' regular right fielder, and his impact on the team only grew from there. The 1984 season was special, not just for Gibson, but for the entire city of Detroit. That year, the Tigers dominated from start to finish, winning 104 games in the regular season and steamrolling their way through the playoffs. Gibson played a huge role in their success, and when the team reached the World Series against the San Diego Padres, he delivered one of the most memorable moments in franchise history. It was Game 5, and the Tigers were up 5-4 in the 8th inning. They had runners on second and third with one out, and Gibson was stepping up to the plate. On the mound stood Goose Gossage, one of the most feared relief pitchers of his era. Given the situation and the fact that Gibson had already homered earlier in the game, most people expected the Padres to walk him. But Gossage had other plans. He told his manager, Dick Williams, that he could strike Gibson out. Gibson crushed Gossage's fastball deep into the right field upper deck of Tiger Stadium, a towering 3-run shot that put the game out of reach and sealed the Tigers' World Series victory. The stadium erupted, and Detroit celebrated its first championship since 1968. That home run didn't just cement Gibson's place in Tigers history, it became one of the most iconic moments in World Series history. Years later, when Goose Gossage was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2008, he stood on stage and looked over at his former manager, Dick Williams. With a grin, he admitted, "I should have walked Gibson." Williams, never one to let something go, fired back with a laugh, joking that Gibson's home run had dented several seats in consecutive rows. It was one of those classic baseball moments, competitive fire on the field, but mutual respect years later. But Gibson's career wasn't just about one home run. He continued to be a key player for the Tigers throughout the 1980s. And even though he was one of the league's most exciting power speed threats, he still had to fight through challenges that were out of his control. After the 1985 season, Gibson became a free agent, but thanks to collusion among MLB owners, who were secretly working together to limit free agency, he received no serious offers from other teams. Forced to stay in Detroit, he helped lead the Tigers to a thrilling American League East title in 1987, edging out the Blue Jays in a dramatic race. Unfortunately, their season ended in disappointment when they lost the American League Championship Series to the eventual world champion Minnesota Twins. Early in his career, Sparky Anderson had famously called Gibson the next Mickey Mantle, a statement he later admitted was probably unfair. It placed an enormous amount of pressure on a young player who was still trying to find his identity. But despite the weight of expectations, Gibson carved out his own path. He was a rare blend of speed and power, finishing in the top 10 in home runs 3 times and in stolen bases 4 times. In 1985, he came just 1 home run short of becoming the first Tiger to join the 30-30 club. And above all, Gibson had a knack for delivering in the biggest moments. That 1984 World Series homer was just one example. He would go on to create another legendary postseason moment in 1988. But this time, it wasn't in a Tigers uniform. The Los Angeles Dodgers, coming off a disappointing 4th-place finish in the National League West, saw something special in Gibson. They weren't just looking for talent, they were looking for leadership, someone who could bring a fire to the clubhouse and help turn things around. Gibson was exactly the kind of player they needed, and when they signed him, they probably had no idea just how much of an impact he would have, not just on their season, but on the entire history of the franchise. Gibson wasn't the kind of guy who just showed up, played his games, and went home. He was intense, passionate, and determined to win at all costs. So when he arrived at spring training with the Dodgers in 1988, he expected to see a team that was just as focused as he was. Instead, he walked into a clubhouse that felt more like a frat house than a professional baseball team. One of the first things he witnessed was a prank involving pitcher Jesse Orosco, who had smeared shoe polish inside Gibson's cap as a joke. Instead of laughing it off, Gibson exploded. To him, this wasn't just harmless fun. It was a sign that the team wasn't serious about winning. He tore into his teammates, calling them out for their lack of professionalism and making it clear that things were going to change. Some guys probably rolled their eyes at first, but they quickly realized that Gibson wasn't messing around. That moment set the tone for the entire season. Gibson didn't just talk, he backed it up with his performance on the field. He played with a fire that was impossible to ignore, and his energy was contagious. The Dodgers, a team that had finished 17 games out of first place the year before, suddenly found themselves playing with confidence. Gibson became the heart and soul of the team, and though he didn't put up jaw-dropping numbers, his leadership was undeniable. By the end of the regular season, the Dodgers had completely transformed from an afterthought into a legitimate contender. Gibson finished the year with a .290 batting average, 25 home runs, 76 RBIs, 106 runs scored, and 31 stolen bases. Those were solid numbers, but nothing that screamed most valuable player. In fact, there were plenty of players who had better stats, like Darryl Strawberry of the New York Mets, who led the league with 39 home runs. But baseball isn't just about numbers, it's about impact. And Gibson's impact on the Dodgers was undeniable. He had taken a struggling team and turned them into winners. He played hurt, he played hard, and he played with an intensity that pushed everyone around him to be better. The writers who voted for the MVP award saw that, and in a somewhat controversial decision, they gave him the trophy. Some people argued that he didn't deserve it, but to Dodgers fans, there was no question Gibson was the most valuable player in the league, not because of his stats, but because of what he had done for his team. With the MVP trophy in hand, Gibson led the Dodgers into the postseason, where they faced off against the heavily favored New York Mets in the National League Championship Series. The Mets had won 100 games that year, compared to the Dodgers' 94, and they had beaten LA in 10 of their 11 regular season matchups. To say the Dodgers were underdogs would be putting it lightly. But if there was one thing Gibson loved, it was proving people wrong. In Game 3 of the series, he made one of the most incredible defensive plays of his career. Playing left field at a rain-soaked Shea Stadium, Gibson tracked a deep fly ball hit by Mookie Wilson. As he sprinted back, he lost his footing on the wet grass and started to slip. But instead of giving up on the play, he stretched out completely, his knees scraping the ground, the rest of his body almost horizontal, and made a full extension catch. It was the kind of play that made you shake your head in disbelief, but in typical Gibson fashion, he acted like it was just another day at the office. Unfortunately, the Dodgers lost that game 8-4, but Gibson wasn't done making his mark on the series. In Game 4, with the score tied in the 12th inning, Gibson stepped up and blasted a solo home run that proved to be the game winner. It was a clutch moment, but he still had more magic left. In Game 5, he crushed a 3-run homer in the 5th inning, helping the Dodgers secure a 7-4 victory. The team was gaining momentum, and Gibson was leading the charge. The Dodgers went on to win the series in 7 games, pulling off a shocking upset and punching their ticket to the World Series. Going into the 1988 World Series, Kirk Gibson wasn't supposed to play. He had injured both legs during the National League Championship Series against the New York Mets. His left hamstring was pulled, and his right knee was swollen. The injuries were bad enough that most people assumed his season was over. He didn't even come out for the usual pre-game introductions in Game 1. He wasn't in the dugout. He was in the training room, watching the game on TV, icing his legs and dealing with the fact that he wouldn't be able to contribute on the field. The Los Angeles Dodgers were facing the powerhouse Oakland Athletics, and things weren't looking good. By the 9th inning, the A's were leading 4-3. Their closer, Dennis Eckersley, one of the best to ever do it, was on the mound, looking to shut the door and give Oakland the win. The Dodgers were down to their last out, with Mike Davis on first base. Then out of nowhere, Dodgers manager Tommy Lasorda made a move that nobody saw coming. He called for Gibson. Gibson hobbled out of the tunnel, barely able to walk. He wasn't even close to 100%, but he knew he had one job: give it everything he had. The crowd erupted when they saw him step up to the plate. He was their guy, their MVP, and now he was here with a chance to save the game. But it wasn't going to be easy. Facing Eckersley is hard enough when you're healthy. When you can barely stand, that's another challenge entirely. Gibson quickly fell behind in the count, 0-2. 2 strikes, one more, and it was over. But then something incredible happened. He started working the count. He let 2 outside pitches go by for balls. He fouled off another pitch to stay alive. On the 7th pitch of the at-bat, as Davis stole second base, Gibson saw what he had been waiting for: a backdoor slider. He knew it was coming. The Dodgers had scouted Eckersley well, and Gibson was ready for it. With an awkward but powerful swing, using mostly his upper body, he made contact. The ball soared into the right field stands. Home run. The Dodgers won the game, 5-4. As he rounded the bases, Gibson pumped his right fist in celebration, a moment that would become one of the most iconic images in baseball history. The Dodgers carried that energy through the rest of the series and won the championship in 5 games. It was Gibson's only at-bat in the entire World Series, but it was all he needed. After his legendary 1988 season, Gibson's career took a few more turns. In 1991, he signed as a free agent with the Kansas City Royals, but his time there was short-lived. By 1992, he was traded to the Pittsburgh Pirates for Neil Heaton. However, his time in Pittsburgh was brief, as the team released him on May 5, 1992. For a little while, it seemed like Gibson's baseball days were over. But then, out of nowhere, he got an offer, though not from a Major League Baseball team. The Detroit Drive, an Arena Football League team, reached out and offered him a chance to return to football, the sport he had played at Michigan State. Despite the intrigue, Gibson declined. Instead, he found himself drawn back to baseball thanks to a familiar face. Sparky Anderson, his former manager with the Detroit Tigers, convinced him to come back. And so, in 1993, Gibson returned to the Tigers, where he would finish out his career. He played 3 more seasons in Detroit, and in 1994, he had a bit of a resurgence. He played in 98 games and hit 23 home runs before a player's strike cut the season short. By 1995, he decided it was finally time to hang up his cleats for good. Over his 17-year career, Gibson played in 1,635 games, collecting 1,553 hits, 255 home runs, 870 RBIs, and 284 stolen bases. His career batting average was 268 thousandths, but his legacy was never about the numbers. It was about the moments, the passion, the fire he brought to the game. Retirement didn't mean the end of baseball for Gibson. In 2003, he took on a coaching role with the Detroit Tigers, serving as the team's bench coach under manager Alan Trammell, his former Tigers teammate. He held that position until midway through the 2005 season, when he switched roles and became the team's hitting coach. In 2007, Gibson took on a new challenge, becoming the bench coach for the Arizona Diamondbacks. As always, his fiery personality and leadership made an impact. By 2010, after the team fired manager A.J. Hinch, the Diamondbacks handed Gibson the reins, naming him interim manager. He wasn't just a temporary fix, though. Shortly after the season ended, he was given a 2-year contract to be the full-time manager. In his first full season in charge, Gibson proved he could lead just as well from the dugout as he could from the batter's box. The Diamondbacks, expected by many to finish in last place, shocked the baseball world by winning the NL West title. For his efforts, Gibson was named National League Manager of the Year in 2011. His time in Arizona lasted 4 years. In 2014, with the team struggling, the Diamondbacks decided to go in a new direction, parting ways with Gibson. He finished his tenure with a 353-375 record in the regular season and a 2-3 record in the postseason. Gibson's career wasn't just about stats or trophies. It was about moments that define what it means to be a competitor, a leader, and a winner. Whether it was calling out his teammates for lack of focus in spring training, delivering one of the most clutch home runs in baseball history, or turning a last-place team into division champs as a manager, Gibson always found a way to leave his mark. To this day, his name is synonymous with grit and determination. And if you ever find yourself watching that 1988 home run again, watching him limp around the bases with his fist pumping in the air, you'll be reminded of why Kirk Gibson will always be remembered as one of baseball's toughest and most unforgettable players. And that wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. Also, do drop a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take care and see you soon. Bye.